Genesis in chapter number 48. If you have the Word of God with you, I would encourage you to make your way right there. Genesis 48. If you're at home, I encourage you to open a Bible. Open a Bible. Take and open. Know where we're at. Be a part of the service. And tonight, we're in Genesis chapter 48. Genesis chapter 48. We're moving forward tonight in our series of thought that we have entitled, But God, what a difference He can make. Throughout this study, we are considering individuals who had a but God moment, a moment when God personally stepped in and intervened in their circumstance. So far, we've seen three thoughts in connection with this phrase, but God. We found Abraham's but God moment took place when his flaws started to show. We found that Jacob's but God moment took place when others began to take advantage of it. We saw in our last thought, we considered two of the three but God moments in the life of Joseph. And we found that they took place when his family turned against him. We found that while it's easy for us to get so focused on what is bad in our life, on what is wrong in our life, and on what we would like to change about our life if we possibly could, we must not lose sight of the fact that through it all, God has a plan, and in His perfect timing and in His perfect way, He is going to work all things together for good. We then considered how we should respond when others or when our family turn against us. And we said that we need to rest. We need to make the choice to rest in and rely on the faithfulness of God. We said we need to choose to remember and rejoice in the goodness of God. And we must choose to refuse to retaliate and negatively impact the plan or the cause of God for our life. We said even during those times, we need to value two things. We need to value righteousness. In other words, we ought to do right even when we don't feel like we've been done right. And secondly, we need to value relationships. Relationships are important and we should value them. Now that brings us to the third but God moment in the life of Joseph. And we find that here in Genesis chapter number 48. Let's take and read together here. I'll read the chapter and then we'll share some thoughts here this evening. Verse number 1. And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. They took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came into Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. And thy issue, which thou begettest after them, shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. And as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath. And I buried her there in the way of Ephrath. The same is Bethlehem. And Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. He brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, Manasseh in his left hand, or Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. His father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again into the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. Now, if you're in the habit of marking things in the Word of God, I'd like to encourage you to go back with me, please, to our key statement that is found in verse number 21, where Jacob says this, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you. Behold, I die, but God shall be with you. For a few moments tonight, I'd like to consider this thought. When life is unfair to me, but God, when life is unfair to me. Let me ask you a question. How many of us in here tonight have never, let me repeat myself, how many of us in here tonight have never had the thought or made this statement, life is unfair, or that was or is unfair? You say, Preacher, I have never had that thought. I have never made that statement. Kids, you're lying. You said it today. All right? You said it today. Maybe I should ask you this way. How many of us have ever had the thought, hey, that was unfair to me? I can raise my hand. Matter of fact, I can raise both my hands and both my feet, and I probably still have room to keep on lifting some things, because why? I've had a lot of thoughts over my life, and a lot of them has been this. Boy, that's unfair. That ain't right. That doesn't work out in my favor. That's not what I thought was going to happen. Life has been unfair to me. And we come here to Genesis chapter 48. And we're once again looking at the life of this man by the name of Joseph. Now, most of us became familiar with Joseph at just an early age. And we're familiar with his life. I mean, Joseph had a coat of many colors. Joseph had a couple of dreams. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. Joseph was bought by Potiphar, and then he was lied about by Potiphar's wife. Joseph was thrown into prison. Joseph was forgotten in prison. Joseph was brought out of prison, and then he was elevated to the second highest position in the land, which enabled him to be once again reunited with both his family and with his father. Now, most of us say, hey, that's Joseph's life. I'm familiar with Joseph. However, what is very interesting to me is that while we are familiar with Joseph's life, We are less familiar with the Genesis chapter 48 season of Joseph's life than we are any other season of Joseph's life. And yet, we probably relate to his Genesis 48 season more than most of his other seasons. Now, in order for that to make sense, we need to gain a little bit of perspective as far as the context of this passage. We come to Genesis in chapter number 48, and we understand that Joseph has already been reunited with his brothers and with his father. As a matter of fact, in chapter 48, his brothers and his father have already moved to and settled in Egypt in a place called Goshen. As a matter of fact, since that took place, 17 years have passed. 17 years. They came to Egypt. They settled in Goshen. 17 years have passed. The reality is that over that period of time, they all became busy with their own personal responsibilities. Joseph spent much of his time trying to help navigate and lead the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan through this famine. And his brethren were busy overseeing Pharaoh's flocks and Pharaoh's herds. They became, or continued really to be, shepherds. Now, one of the things that I love about this portion of Scripture and this season of Joseph's life is that we gain understanding that even though he was busy, Joseph never lost sight of what was really important. And what was really important to Joseph was his family. Now, the reality is Joseph could not spend all his time with them. But what we do see is that Joseph spent some time with his father and some time with his family in chapter 47, chapter 48, chapter 49, and in chapter number 50. As a matter of fact, in chapter 47, we see that Joseph cared for his father and for his family. In chapter 48, we see that Joseph checked in on his father Jacob when he was sick. In chapter 49, we see that Joseph cherished, or he valued, the words and the wisdom of his father Jacob. In chapter 50, we see that Joseph made the decision to continue with his brothers even after their father Jacob had died. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm trying to emphasize the fact that regardless of where we are, regardless of what we've been through, regardless of what we're currently going through, and regardless of how our family treated us, we must remember that our family is and should be of utmost importance to us. Now listen to me. You get to choose every other relationship in your life, but God chose your family. And that ought to mean something to you. There's only one relationship in my family that I chose. You say, what relationship is that? That's my wife. That's it. That's it. I had no choice. I had no choice on who my parents were. Had no choice on who my brother was. I had no choice in who my father and mother-in-law were. No choice at all. I had a choice in my wife. But you know what? All of my family is important because God chose them and placed me in that family. You say, preacher, you don't understand. You just don't get it. My family is terrible. Yeah, so was Joseph's. Weren't they? I'm pretty sure that your family didn't betray you, contemplate to kill you, and sell you into slavery. You say, well, preacher, I may have got the first one down. Yeah, I doubt you've gone that far. I doubt it. And what did Joseph do? He still found time for his family. He still cared and loved about his family. Can I say it this way? No matter how picture perfect their social media accounts may make it seem, there is no family that is picture perfect. None. Not a one. You say, why? Because sin makes relationships difficult. And the reality is that families are either more or less difficult depending on the amount of sin that each member of that family is currently allowing to rule in their heart. But here's the thing. While sin may make family relationships very difficult, it doesn't mean that our family should become of any lesser value or of any lesser importance to us. Now, that's not the message tonight, but I think there's a powerful truth here in the passage where we can see that. We come to Genesis chapter 48. We find that Joseph receives word that his father is sick. Now, the idea behind that word sick there is that Jacob had been sick for some time already, but he has progressively gotten worse and worse. He is getting weaker and weaker. In other words, Jacob is dying. He's dying. And immediately Joseph stops everything that he's doing and he takes his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, with him to go see his father Jacob before he died. And the remainder of Genesis in chapter number 48, we have recorded for us what took place in that meeting between Joseph and his father Jacob. Now, if I had to sum up Genesis chapter number 48 in one word, I would use the word unfair. Unfair. Now, I would write beside Genesis 48 in my Bible, I would write the word unfair. Now, while the word itself never shows up in Genesis chapter 48, nor does it show up in the entire Bible for that fact, we find the touch of unfairness throughout the entire passage. Just like you and I have gone through seasons and maybe many multiple seasons where we viewed life as being unfair, so did Joseph. Life is unfair. You ever made that statement? Well, if you have, here's the thing. You're absolutely right. Life's unfair. It's unfair. You say, why? Because life is full of unpleasant conditions and uncomfortable circumstances. Life is unfair because it's full of unrealistic demands and unreasonable expectations. Life is unfair because it is full of unwanted trials and unanswerable questions. Life is unfair because it's full of unholy individuals and because it's full of unjust outcomes. Listen to me. Life is unfair, so get over it. Okay? It's unfair. From a very early age, we think things are unfair. So what do you mean? I think it's unfair when somebody else gets an extra slice of pizza. I think it's unfair when somebody else gets the last piece of candy. I think it's unfair when I have made sure to get the bag of chips that I like and I go to get them out of the cabinet and I've got 4 selfish beasts that live in my house that eat the chips where I get my fair share. I'm doing some house cleaning tonight, okay? Why? Life is unfair. It's unfair, and throughout this passage, I think that we see that all of life's unfairness can be divided up into 3 different categories. And here's the reality. We all run the risk of becoming prisoners to the issue of unfairness as we journey through this life. Let me reemphasize that because that's key to this lesson here tonight. We all, listen, we all will become victims of life's unfairness. But we don't have to all become the prisoner of life's unfairness. Let's look at these categories together. Number one, it's easy for us to think that life is unfair when we don't like our path. It's easy for us to think that life is unfair when we don't like our path. Now, we could look at the larger portion of Genesis chapter 48 here tonight, but let's highlight two verses. Number one, look at verse number 5, and then number 2, look at verse number 9. Now, what I want you to do is to pay close attention to the wording that Jacob and that Joseph choose to use in describing the path of Joseph. Notice in verse number 5, here's what the Bible says. And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt. I'm going to stop reading there. We're going to make a connection. Now look in verse number 9. In verse 5, Jacob was speaking. But notice in verse number 9, Joseph is speaking. And he says this, they, speaking of Ephraim and Manasseh, are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. Did you catch the difference? Did you catch it? Listen to it again, verse 5. And now thy two sons Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, Jacob speaking. Verse 9, Joseph speaking. They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. While Jacob had no problem identifying Joseph's blessing in connection with Joseph's path, Joseph couldn't bring himself to do it. What does Joseph not say? He does not use the name Egypt. Doesn't do it. He says, they're my sons that God hath given me in this place. They said, preacher, you're just playing semantics here. And perhaps I am. But I can't help but think that while Jacob and Joseph both saw Ephraim and Manasseh as blessings, Jacob saw the blessings that the path produced, while Joseph could only see how difficult and painful the path was that produced those very same blessings. It's a matter of perspective, isn't it? You see, I get it, Joseph. The path that brought you to this place in your life wasn't fun. I get it. The path that brought you to this place in your life wasn't easy. I get it, Joseph. The path that brought you to this place in your life was not a path that you would have ever chosen for yourself. But Joseph, let me tell you something. Let me highlight some things. It was your path that gave you a wife. Where did Joseph's wife come from? Not Canaan. Came from Egypt. It was his path that didn't just provide for Joseph a wife, but it was the path that provided for Joseph a blessing in children. 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim. Let's take it a step further. It was Joseph's path that provided for Joseph so that he could provide for the wife and the children and for the family that God had provided for him. So what are you saying, preacher? I'm saying the path was important. It wasn't fun. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what he would have chosen. But there were blessings to be found in the path that he trod. You see, there are blessings to be enjoyed. And there are celebrations to be given along the path and as a result of the path that God has chosen for your life. But here's the thing. We have to make the choice as to how we view the path of our life. We can either choose to see the path for the burden or possibly for the burdens that it presented, or we can choose to see the path for the blessings that it produced. You are never promised a peachy, easy stroll through life. You're not. Listen, you're not. Life is hard. As a matter of fact, I think that's what Peter had in mind in 1 Peter 1, verses 5 through 8, when he said this, who are kept by the power of God through faith unto salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. Wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations. That the trial of your faith, being much more precious than that of gold, that perisheth though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen ye love, in whom, though now ye see him not, yet believing, ye shall rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. In other words, the path may not always be pleasant, but the purpose and the plan of God is always praiseworthy. Let me say that again. The path may not always be pleasant, but the purpose and the plan of God is always praiseworthy. Hey, look, it would have been easy for Joseph to look at his father and for Joseph to look at his brothers and think and feel that they somehow had it easier than him because they didn't have to go through the same Egyptian experience that Joseph had to go through. But the reality is this, that Jacob and Joseph's brothers experienced in Canaan, what they experienced in Canaan, presented for them just as much difficulty as Joseph's experienced in the land of Egypt. You say, preacher, there's no way possible. Can you think with me? What did Jacob have to deal with? The thought of the death of his son. That's what Canaan had for him. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that was an easy path? You say, what about his brothers? Joseph was thrown in prison. Yeah. And you know what his brethren did? When they sold him into slavery, they imprisoned themselves in a sense of shame and regret that followed them the majority of the rest of their life. There was a prison in Canaan for them, just like there was a prison for Joseph in Egypt. Listen, somebody else may not have had the same experience you had, but that doesn't mean that your path was any easier. That doesn't mean that your path was any more fun or less fun than theirs. It just means that they had problems along their path. Their path had difficulties that your path may not have had. And they thought the same thing about their life as you did as yours. The path seemed unfair. Not only is it easy for us to think that life is unfair when we don't like our path, but notice secondly that it's easy to think that life is unfair when we don't like our portion. When we don't like our portion. Jacob notices that Joseph's two sons are with him. And he tells Joseph in verse 9 to bring them to him so that he can bless them. And then the Bible takes time to begin to describe the arrangement of what happens. Now, you can read it yourself there, chapter 48, verses 12 through 13. Long story short, Joseph knows that Jacob's eyesight is not good. So, here's what Joseph does. Joseph places Manasseh, his firstborn, on his left side. And Joseph places Ephraim, the secondborn, on his right side. Now, why is that? Well, if you think about it, Jacob is faced the other way. Jacob is facing Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh. And so since Manasseh is on this side, he is on Jacob's right hand. And since Ephraim is on this side, he is on Jacob's left side. Okay? Why? Joseph knows he can't see. Now, in tradition that time, there was the firstborn blessing. And the father would take, symbolically shown by the placing of the right hand. And the right hand would be placed upon that person, and the blessing would be verbally given to that son. It entailed this, among other things, that while all of the family would get an evenly divided amount of inheritance, the firstborn, the oldest, would have an extra portion given to them. And so Joseph arranged everything just right. Jacob would take his hand and put it on the firstborn, his right hand, and his left hand on the other. And yet here's what happens. It didn't happen that way at all. Jacob, instead of doing this, Jacob does this. Instead of putting his right hand on the oldest, he puts his right hand on the youngest. And he begins to pronounce the blessing upon the children. Now, again, long story short, the Bible says that this displeased Joseph. Joseph's standing there, and he has his oldest here, has his youngest here, and he sees his father take his hand and put the blessing of the firstborn on the youngest, and it displeased him. Preacher, what does that mean? It made him angry to the point of action. Joseph is fuming. He's mad. Why? Because this is his firstborn. And he goes to lift the hand of his father and move it from the secondborn and put it on the firstborn. And Jacob, paraphrasing of course, looks at his son and says, Joseph, stop it. I know what I've done, and I know what I'm doing. That's essentially what Jacob says, right? Stop it. I know what I'm doing. I know what I've done. Yet Joseph, we see his reaction. But I wonder, how did Manasseh feel? We're not told it in the passage. Did Manasseh feel cheated? Did he feel like what was rightfully his had been given to somebody else? Did he feel wronged? Was there this idea of anger and jealousy and envy that swelled up within his heart? You said, preacher, I don't know. Why? What would make you say that? Well, I know what I am, as I just demonstrated a minute ago. Cool Ranch Dorito chips in the blue bag. I like them. The problem is my kids do too. And they get into them. I knew there was a bag on top of the refrigerator. And I went in there the other day and I looked up top of the refrigerator. You know what? They weren't there. I looked inside the cabinet and they weren't there. You know what? I thought that a portion of what I bought, what I spent my money on, and I didn't get the first bite of a Cool Ranch Dorito chip. Not the one. You see what I'm saying? We get selfish, don't we? That's mine. And it belongs to me. And for anybody else to have what's mine, for anybody else to get control of what is mine, makes me angry to the point of action. Why? Because we think life is unfair when we don't like our portion. I came across this thought in my study. I wanted to share it with you here tonight. They said this: life doesn't always deliver equal portions for everyone. Our problem is that we only see in the dimension of time. While there is one weaving the tapestry of our lives with eternal purposes, we arrogantly presume that we are the best judges of fairness and equality. Our limited perspective leads us to compare what we think we deserve with what others appear to get. That's a powerful statement. Preacher, what are you saying? I'm saying it's mine, it belongs to me. You ever thought that sometimes, though it may very well indeed be ours, God may know that you're not ready to handle it yet? He might know that the temptations and the trials that comes along with having whatever it is, you're not ready for. Sometimes God's no is simply Him protecting us from struggles that we aren't ready to have. Sometimes God's no is a way for Him to protect us from our own, for lack of a better way to say it, from our own stupidity. Or perhaps God just knows that it would be better left in His hands than placed in yours. That's why Paul said this. He says, I've learned to be content in whatever state I'm in. If he did well, he was content. If he was chained to a prison guard in a jail cell with nothing left to his name, you know what Paul said? I'm going to be content. We think life is unfair when we don't like our path. We think life is unfair when we don't like our portion. Thirdly, we think life is unfair when we don't like our problems. Look at verse number 21. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die. But God shall be with you and bring you again in the land of your fathers. What we're going to find here is that as Joseph, while he may have had his suspicions have now been confirmed by his father. His father, with whom 22 years of their relationship together had been robbed from him. And who he had essentially, although 17 years, but who he had essentially just gotten back. He was dying. And I can't help but think that Joseph looked at his problem and said, you know what? It's unfair. And yet there was not a single thing that Joseph could do about it. Not a single thing. So what we're going to find out as we go through life is that there are going to be certain things that come into our life that just don't seem fair, but they can't be changed either. Can't be changed. It was Paul Tripp who said this. He said, God employs temporary hardship to produce things of eternal significance in our hearts. And how true of a statement that is. Can I say it this way? Our problems often become the very process that God uses to prepare us for something, and that God uses to produce something very precious in us, for us, and through us. You see, problems aren't necessarily bad. Problems are opportunities. They might not be easy, and they might not be solved yet. But it's an opportunity for us to spend time with our Heavenly Father and for us to see how He is going to come through this time. So life's unfairness can be divided into three categories. We think life is unfair when we don't like our path, when we don't like our portion, and when we don't like our problems. Now I want to repeat a statement that I made earlier in the message tonight. And this is the statement. We all will become victims of life's unfairness. But we don't have to allow ourselves to become the prisoner of life's unfairness. I told you here that chapter 48, if I had to sum it up into one word, it would be the word unfair. And if you're not careful, when you move through Genesis chapter 48, you look at Joseph as being the one hit by the unfairness of life. His path was unfair, his portion was unfair, and his problems were unfair. But if that's all you got out of the passage, you miss the bigger picture of the passage. Because he's not the only one hit with life's unfairness. You say, what do you mean? The passage isn't just about how life was unfair to Joseph. The passage is also about how life was unfair to Jacob. And yet we find two people responding to life's unfairness in really two different ways. And tonight, quickly, I want to give you how Jacob handled life's unfairness. Number one, and by the way, I think it's something that we ought to choose to implement when life is unfair to us. Notice, first of all, how did Jacob deal with life's unfairness? Jacob admitted his struggle. He admitted his struggle. You said, preacher, where did he admit his struggle? Well, we'll look at verse number 7. Jacob speaking, he says, and as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come in Ephraim, and I buried her there in the way of Ephraim, the same as Bethlehem. What has he just done? He's just admitted that his path wasn't easy. Why? Because his wife died. Now, I have not gone through that yet. Some of you have. I can't begin to imagine what that's like, but I know this. Jacob admitted to the fact that his path wasn't easy. Notice in verse number 5. He says, and now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, here it is, before I came unto thee into Egypt. You see, Jacob didn't just admit that his path wasn't easy. He also admitted that his portion was taken from him. You say, what do you mean? Jacob left Canaan to go where? To go to Egypt. Did God not promise Abraham and Isaac and Jacob the land of Canaan? Yeah. Where's Jacob? He ain't in Canaan. If you remember, God had to tell Jacob, hey, it's all right, go ahead and go down to Egypt. What are you saying, preacher? I'm saying he didn't like his portion. And he could have saw life as being unfair, but he didn't. Jacob's path wasn't easy. Jacob's portion was taken from him. But notice, thirdly, that Jacob's problem was very real. We see two of them in the passage. Verse number 11. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thee. You think that was a problem? Can you imagine being a father who you think your son is dead? That'd be a problem. That'd be something that I would think would be unfair. Notice in verse number 21, we see the second aspect of the problem. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die. You say, what is that? That's a problem. You say, why? I don't want to die. You say, what do you mean? I want Jesus to return and take me home. I don't want to have to die. I want to go the express route. I want to bypass the door of death and go straight into the presence of Jesus, okay? I know. It's selfish. I don't want to die. I don't want to die physically. I want to be transformed as I'm trying to catch up with those who died before me, okay? That's what I want to happen. There's a problem here. His path wasn't easy. His portion was taken from him, and his problem was very real. Preacher, what did Jacob do? He balled up in a ball and had a pity party for himself. No, that's not what he did. He's admitting his struggle, yes. Listen, just because you bury your head in the sand doesn't mean your problems aren't real. He had very real problems. But he didn't let himself become a prisoner to his path, to his portion, or to his problem. He admitted the struggle. That's step one. What's step two? After you admit the struggle, then you need to acknowledge the bigger picture. Admit the struggle, and then acknowledge the bigger picture. Notice with me in verse number 16. Jacob is speaking. Jacob is giving the blessing. And he says, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. What's Jacob doing? Jacob is acknowledging the bigger picture. What's he saying? He's saying the timeline of God's plan doesn't just include, and it doesn't just revolve around me. He recalls the blessing that God had told Abraham. He recalled the blessing that had then been passed from Abraham down to Isaac. He then recalled the blessing from God that was passed down from Isaac to himself. And now he's saying this: I don't understand how it's all going to happen. I don't understand where all the pieces are. I don't understand how all the pieces come together. I don't know when all the pieces are going to come together. But God is working all things together for good. Preacher, I have a hard time getting there. You know why? You're still stuck on yourself. You're still stuck on yourself. You can't get your eyes off of you long enough to say, you know what? I might not like the path. I might not like the portion. I might not like the problem, but God's up to something. God didn't stop working just because your path didn't match your plan. God didn't stop working just because your portion didn't match what you wanted. God didn't stop working just because problems come into your life. Oh, friend, God's still working. And He may be behind the scenes, but at some point in time, He's going to pull the curtain back and say, you know what? Here's what I was doing. We need to admit the struggle, sure. We need to acknowledge the bigger picture. And then lastly tonight, Jacob affirmed his faith and his trust in God. Look at verse number 21. He says this: behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and God shall bring you again unto the land of your fathers, even though things seemed unfair. Jacob affirmed his faith in God. You see, when things in your life seem unfair, you can make the choice to trust in the presence of God. Even though your life seems unfair, you can make the choice to trust in the plan of God. Even though your life seems unfair, you can make the choice to trust in the promises of God. Jacob says this: I could whine, I could cry, I could complain, I could have a pity party over my path, over my portion, and over my problem. But what good's that going to do? All that's going to do is keep me in the prison of life's unfairness. I don't want to be a prisoner. I may be a victim, but I want to go to be a victor over unfairness, and I'm going to trust the presence of God, the plan of God, and the promise of God. Listen to me, I guarantee it. If you have not already come to situations in your life that you feel like are unfair, it's coming. You're going to get there. And the choices you make will either give you victory or will lock you up in a prison. But listen to me, you're the person to blame if that happens. You say, what do you mean? You can blame anybody else. You know what Joseph could have said? Could have blamed his brothers. You know what Jacob could have done? He could have blamed people. He could have blamed the path. He could have blamed the portion. He could have blamed the problem. There were a lot of things that he could have sat down and said, well, this went wrong, and that went bad, and they lied about me, and they mistreated me, and they stole from me, and they took from me, and they, this, that, there, oh my, what happened? Here's what Jacob said. Has life been unfair? Yes. Is God at work? Yes. Is God with me? Yes. Is God going to keep his plan and his promises? Yes. Then let me get up out of my wallowing mess and let me continue forward, believing and trusting God. You say he's dying. Yep. He's not going to make it to Canaan. Well, not technically true. You say, what do you mean? His bones are going to be carried out. That's what he just confirmed with Joseph back in the previous chapter. His bones are going to get out and get buried in Canaan, just like Joseph's bones are going to be carried out. Okay? But you know what Jacob did? I think Jacob's telling his son Joseph, and I think Jacob was speaking to his grandchildren, saying this. You can look at life as being unfair. And you can put yourself in a prison that only brings greater problems in your life and that only causes greater pain for those that are around you. Or you can simply say, life's unfair, but God is still good. That's the example that Jacob is given. Joseph had a but God moment, and it had to do when he felt like life was unfair. I wonder, will you let that but God moment take place in your life and become a victor over life's prison of unfairness? Or will you willingly walk in the cell, take the key and lock the door on yourself, and remain trapped and continue to feel my path is unfair, my portion's unfair, my problem's unfair? See, here's the thing. If you find yourself a prisoner to life's unfairness, you're still holding the key to get out. You're holding the key to get out. You have locked yourself in the prison. Will you affirm that your problems are real, admit the struggle, acknowledge the bigger picture, and then affirm that you are going to believe and trust the presence, the plan, and the promises of God? Take that key, unlock the door, and determine that you no longer are going to be the prisoner to what you deem life's unfairness. But God, when life is unfair to me.